Should be good.
You think? Okay. Again, as I mentioned, it kind of dovetails in with David opening up the book of Judges. You have, of course, sequential books to some degree. There is overlap. There's all kinds of different considerations. Judges, as David put it, when you start dealing with the chronology and stuff, is a bit of a nightmare to keep straight. It really is. Joshua is a little easier because Joshua took over from Moses. Okay? We know when Moses died. We know when the Exodus was, everything that went about it. So you have that 40 years in the desert following the coming out of Egypt. So you wind up with a 1406 period for Joshua taking over and stepping into what we call the conquest of the land. That was, as we recall, Joshua's major charge in life. His major responsibility was to lead the Israelite nation into the promised land. And you remember that you had the two tribes after they got done with Kadesh Barnea and wandering around in the Negev down here. They wound up coming up here and conquering all these small little city-state kingdoms and etc. And then they wound up leaving 2.5 of the tribes over here, going across the Jordan River, taking Jericho, Ai, and then all of a sudden they have this delegation appears in chapter 9 that seemingly comes from a far land, right? The Gibeonites. They don't identify themselves as such. You wonder, who did they identify themselves as? And the leadership of Israel, why didn't they pursue a little more questioning? Here comes a people that wants to make a treaty with God's chosen people, and they don't seem to really go through the checklist of things that could be significant, like who actually are you? And what are your actual credentials? And of course the biggest boo-boo, technologically and theologically speaking, boo-boo is a very good term. They wound up really messing up when they didn't seek God's counsel at all. They thought they could cover it. After all, it's just an administrative detail, right? We already know how to the protocols and jump through the hoops and check the boxes and we're good. We don't need to bother God with something like this unidentified people coming in that seemingly are from a far land. Of course, they realize in short order that they've been deceived. They haven't done their homework. They haven't gone to the Lord for their direction, and problems then develop and everything that ensues with that. They do, however, honor their word. They honor their word to the Gibeonites, even after they find out the deception, because to go back on their treaty is going to be a direct reflection on the God that they serve. Joshua and the leadership at least understand that. They can't go back. Interestingly, the Gibeonites, in an attempt to continue being a free people, they attempt to make a treaty with Israel, and as a result of their deception, they become bondservants. They become slaves to the nation of Israel for the next actually hundreds of years. So yeah, they didn't get wiped out by the Jewish nation, but they wound up becoming slaves for all practical purposes. Bearers of wood, bearers of water, holders in the field, and everything else. Israel, however, has made an oath, and they continue with that oath. When you find, again, this is the southern campaign. Israel has driven a wedge in through Jericho and Ai past Ramah. And the next thing up here, you've got Gibeon laying right out here. It's kind of an interesting thing because where Israel is at the beginning of this, where the Gibeonites show up, Gibeon's only like 7-8 miles away. Now, this is that David explained this morning. This is the hill country. Okay? This, you've got the plains run down here, down the Gaza Strip. Quite fertile, quite farmable, open country for the most part. Okay? Then you've got the valley plain that runs down through the Jordan River, where is also got land that can be irrigated, raise crops, and so forth, population centered. Okay? This strip down through here, this is Mount Ebal, this is Mount Gerizim. There's a whole mountainous strip that runs all the way down through here. It's the hill country is the way the King James version phrases that. Okay? Very broken country. What in his military capacity, what Joshua is doing is he's splitting the country into two campaigns. Okay? He's driving a wedge through, and then he's going to turn his forces and capture down, and when that's done, he's going to reroute his forces, regroup, and head north, okay, and capture the land. Good tactical consideration from a human point of view. I would expect God probably told him or encouraged him. I mean, military tactics are still military tactics, regardless from a human perspective. Joshua's been fighting his whole life, and he can continue to do so. So when he approaches this, he understands that this makes sense, and God gives his endorsement. We're going to see that as chapter 10 opens. Somebody read verses 1 and 2 of chapter 10. Actually, chapters 9 and 10 go together. They're both about Gibeon, but completely different facets. We're going to look at the second part this evening. Somebody read verses 1 and 2.
Now it came to pass, when Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, had heard how Joshua had taken Ai, and had utterly destroyed it, as he had done to Jericho and her king, so he had done to Ai and her king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel, and were among them, that they feared greatly, because Gibeon was a great city, as one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all the men thereof were mighty.
Okay. Now, you've got terms like great city, royal city, greater than. I'm going to just make a speculative assumption that greater than means more highly populated. Okay. Ai, 6,000-7,000 people, which was huge for a town in that day and age. They didn't have all of the nice conveniences then that we have today to take care of a metro area, like garbage trucks, supermarkets, takeout chicken. They didn't have that kind of stuff. Just keeping the houses supplied, with food and water and heating capability. You say, well, heating capability, yeah, depending upon time of year. If you're going through this mountainous country, it gets cold at night. It gets down to freezing. Okay? It's not just sunny Palm Springs type of thing, 24/7, 365 every year. It doesn't work that way. So it tells us when you have now what is being recorded for us is you got a whole group of kings that are here. They hear Jericho was miraculously destroyed by the Israelites. They hear Ai was completely demolished and burnt to the ground by the Israelites. And now they hear that Gibeon, one of the great cities in their area, has turned traitor. For all practical purposes, that's exactly what's happened. They've signed some type of a peace treaty with this Jewish nation, and we can't allow this. That's all there is to it. It simply can't be done. And they list a whole bunch of names here: Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem. Okay, so what you got Jerusalem down here. Jerusalem's only 8 or 10 miles away from Gibeon. And you've got Ramah and Bethel and Gibeon over here on the coast. You've got Gaza and Gezer, and there's a bunch of others that I didn't put in here. Otherwise, everything is completely messed up. So you kind of get the idea. You have a group of kings, and it tells us that something about Gibeon was a great city, one of the royal cities. Apparently that is a reference to a coalition of these city king rulers, okay, that have formed together, and now Gibeon has abandoned that coalition, has actually turned traitor, and has thrown itself on the mercy of the Jewish people, the Israelite nation. And the very first thing that the kings see is, we can't allow this to happen. This is breaking our military alliance. It's also breaking our defensive posture. And these people are driving in. They're going to turn. And right now they don't know if it's north or south. But with Gibeon's being a turncoat, all of a sudden they realize that they're next. Okay? That very likely the God of Israel is going to go ahead and take advantage of all this. And they can't allow this to happen. They have to maintain control over their coalition. Gibeon has cut and run, so the 4 remaining kings go after Gibeon. They're going to whip them into shape. They're going to punish them. That's exactly what's going on. So they go after them regardless. Now, they take their mighty men, their men of valor and everything, and pursue it. Okay. Verse 3 says, wherefore Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, said to Hoham, king of Hebron, and under Piram, king of Jarmuth, and under, my eyes aren't focusing right, Japhia, the king of Lachish, and under Deber, king of Eglon, saying, and you're going to say, wait, not sure about those last 2. Well, we don't know where they are for sure. You know, they were kings of city-states. You understand what a city-state is? It's a guy who builds a wall around the town, and the people come in and say, if you defend us, we'll give you 10% of everything that we own. Because you own the wall. You provide the protection. It's pretty much what it is. The city expands, the walls expand, commerce increases, people make money, there's an easy comfort of living, their trade, you get on people's trade routes, and more commerce comes in, and the city-state, it's not just a city, it's the outlying area. It might be a few miles, it might be a greater few miles. And now you have, instead of just 50 or 100 people, you might have 30,000 or more that are part of that city-state. So you could have a big one, have a little one. You know, there's these 5 royal ones that they're calling royal ones that are the backbone of the Canaanites that are in that particular area. And they don't like what Gibeon has done, so they go after them. So verse 4 says, the king of Adonizedek, that is the king of Jerusalem, that's the city-state of, the biblical Jerusalem. And he's right down here. He's only 8-10 miles away. And he sees all this, it's hill country. Okay, and there's all kinds of considerations, but these military movements are a real concern. And so he says, come to these other guys. Come help me smite Gibeon. Gibeon. For it has made, Gibeon has made peace with Joshua and the children of Israel. Yeah, in other words, they're a turncoat. Okay? They abandoned the coalition that they were in and flipped over to the enemy for all practical purpose. Therefore, the 5 kings of the Amorites, king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, and the king, gathered themselves together, went up in all their host, and encamped before Gibeon and made war against it. Okay. So they all throw a quick coalition together. You know, they all got on the same Facebook page, right? You know, Kings of the South. You know, and you know that's the Facebook page, and you know the word gets out, and boom, and they are headed up here to Gibeon. They are going to whip the Gibeonites. Okay? They're going to chasten them. They're going to punish them. You know, they have abandoned, you know, the coalition that they were in and gone over to the enemy. You get the idea all the way through. Somebody read verses 6 and 7 for us.
And the men of Gibeon sent unto Joshua to the camp of Gilgal, saying, Slack not thy hand from thy servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us. and all the kings of the Amorites that dwell in the mountains are gathered together against us. So Joshua ascended from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, all the mighty men of valor.
Okay, thank you, Kent. He says the men of Gibeon, they immediately, when they see this group coming up against them that is going to attack their city, they send a delegation to the Israelite camp and say, help, we're your servants. Remember? You know, and now somebody, modern thinking has suggested, very bad suggestion, that what the treaty that the Gibeonites made with Israel is actually a mutual defense treaty. That's got to be one of the dumbest statements that, you know, it came out of some theologian's office at a college someplace. You know, yeah, really. This is not a mutual defense. The Israelites don't need the Gibeonites to be partnering in a mutual defense treaty. Okay? They don't need that. Okay? They've just seen God destroy, you know, Jericho and then give them Ai, the miracle crossing the Jordan River, you know, and on it goes. This is God, okay, and his people taking the land of promise. They don't need a little city-state called Gibeon in order to help them do it. This is not a mutual defense treaty. I mean, you really, that's a real stretch to try to put that in here. This is people that have willingly subjugated themselves under deceptive circumstances and have wound up becoming the servants of Israel, but Israel now has an obligation to protect even its servants. And to their credit, that's exactly the way they respond. This delegation goes up and says, wow, you know, we switched sides and came over to serve you, and this didn't go well with our former buddies, with our former, you know, association. It's you know, they're right now camping around the city and threatening to kill us all and burn the city and so on and so forth. So verse 7 said that Joshua ascended from Gilgal. Okay, got the thing. Okay, it's Gilgal. Gilgal's over here. Okay, he's down out of here, and he's going to swerve back now and head back, you know, to the defense of Gibeon. You can only put so much detail on a map, right? What you have flowing out from here, actually, if I remember right, it comes out from the valley between Ebal and Gerizim. You have a valley that runs down this way, down through here. Okay, it's broad enough that it makes the passage of armies reasonably possible. It has become a place of back and forth military movements for thousands of years. That's part of this. You'll see it in the book of Judges in a couple of places where they pursue them. You'll get the long, windy name here in just a moment. Verse 8 says, the Lord said to Joshua, fear them not. Right off the bat. He says, nope, nothing to be afraid of here. I have delivered them into your hand. There will be not a man of them stand before you. Like I said, Joshua was totally aware that he had God on his side in a very direct military fashion. Okay, we have God on our side too, but not quite in the same fashion, do we? Joshua had a special relationship as far as his conquering the land situation here, and God re-emphasizes that by speaking to him and telling him that this coalition is toast. That's all there is to it. Joshua, verse 9 says, therefore came to them suddenly, went up from Gilgal all night. Now, let me give you, I like some of the details, some of you don't. It's, Gilgal actually is back towards the north end, the northwest end of the Dead Sea, compared to Ai, and even compared to Jericho. After the whole Ai thing, okay, camped here in Ramah, but they wind up coming back to, we're not told specifically why, to Gilgal. If you're going to go from Gilgal to Gibeon, it's about 25 to 28 miles. You have a forced night march through mountain country, okay, of the Israelite nation, the Israelite army. Sometimes we miss that. This is a military tactic. You know, is this Joshua's idea, or does God tell him this is the way you should do it? I don't know. You're going to have a hard time being real dogmatic about, you know, which position that could be. But it says that the outcome was a forced night march. Now, these guys are already kind of battle weary. Not only have they been tromping out through the desert for 40 years and conquered, you know, the Sif Jordan and everything, come across here and done battles with these other towns, but you know, they're getting a little bit war weary at this point. They're probably not in the peak of physical ability, and Joshua says, "Okay, guys, you know, it's I know you just settled in, you know, with another bowl of clam chowder, you know, and you're having a nice evening meal. Go ahead, eat hearty, because in a half hour we're going to force march 25 miles with a combat load. And at the very crack of dawn, we're going to attack. You've never seen the country before? We probably, being the military guy he was, the first thing Joshua did is probably send out spies to check out the approaches to Gibeon and where the land laid and how he could maneuver his people into position. Please notice, God is going to deliver them. But the responsibility of Israel is to fight. Sometimes we get that out of proportion, or we kind of lose. Oh, if God's on my side, I can just sit back, put my feet up, and let God do it. You know, 25, 30 years ago, there was a let go and let God movement that kind of permeated a lot of Christianity, did all kinds of harm, that somehow we can just sit back and coast and God will take care of everything. That's not biblical. Human believers, that, you know, the human beings that are believers have a responsibility to act, okay, under the direction and power of God, okay, so that God's deliverance becomes effectual. You know, there's this, it goes on, and this was one place again that shows this throughout especially the Old Testament. Verse 10 says, "The Lord discomfited them before Israel and slew them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, and chased them all along the way that goes from Bethhoron, and smote them to Azekah and unto Makkedah." He's talking about this valley that runs right down through and goes through Gibeon and runs right down this way. Okay? That's where they ran. Okay? A surprise attack. Maybe almost still under cover of darkness. I mean, it's kind of half gray out there. You can't really see out there too far. And Joshua has pushed his guys. There they are, and boom. I guess, surprise attack is probably a realistic term. Okay? This coalition of kings that had gathered against Gibeon, you have no mention of them suspecting that they were going to be attacked. As far as they know, all their intelligence has said these guys are camped at Gilgal. We can go up and whip Gibeon into shape and get home for lunch and not have to worry about the Israelite army. Except a night march brings them into position, and total chaos. You know, panic sets in. You know, if it was, because the implication with a night march is you are there at the first crack of dawn to attack. I mean, it's just barely, kinda, sorta getting light, and you've got tens of thousands of the Israelite soldiers coming down off the hills, you know, going at an army that is mostly asleep, still in their bunks, you know, still tied up in those old army sleeping bags, those mummy bags that you can't get out of. I hope you don't believe some of this, but you know, it was, yeah, you fight your way out of that. When you get done, it looks like a goose died a violent death, you know, because there's stuff floating, feathers everywhere. Yeah, I get the idea. So the Lord discomfited them. There was a great slaughter, and they chased them all the way down that valley. And more on that chase in a moment. It came to pass, verse 11 says, as they fled from before Israel and were in the going down to Bethoron, that the Lord cast great stones from heaven upon them all the way to Azekah, and they died. More were killed with the hailstones than died in battle. So how big of a hailstone have you ever been hit with? Been hit with one that big and you're still walking upright? Yeah, there are some big honking hailstones out there that are literally the size of baseballs. Okay? And boy, can they demolish a crop fast. And boy, are they tough on insurance businesses, because all you have to do is have a passage of those things. We had it happen a couple times. All you have to do is have a big hailstorm go whoomp through a brand new car lot. You know, and you've got millions, literally millions of dollars worth of damage that you're taking off roof panels and trunks and windshield replacement and hoods. I mean, it's a nightmare for insurance companies. But anyway, how about that for trivia? Huh? Yeah, okay. But these hailstones doesn't give us a lot of particulars on it, but as the army then in its defeat turns to run, being pursued, God directs the hail on the armies gathered against Gibeon. Very specific hailstorm. You know, you and I deal with hailstorms. We get thumped with them just like our unrighteous neighbor does. Okay? Our crop gets hammered just like his crop gets hammered. Okay? This is a very specifically directed hailstorm. Lethal. Okay? And it kills only those gathered against Gibeon. It only kills the foes of Israel. Okay? Yeah, I think that's pretty directed. You kind of get the idea. Verse 12. Then spoke Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites. This is just kind of an overall classification before the children of Israel. And he, Joshua, said in the sight of Israel, sun, stand still on Gibeon, moon, stand still on the valley of Ajalon. That's that valley. Okay? Now, this is perhaps not unique in the Old Testament, but it's certainly one of very few occasions where you had an individual man directly, orally, and in public pray that God would perform a miracle for the nation. This is Joshua saying, Lord, this is what I want you to do. We're running out of daylight, you know, and you kind of get the idea that by now half the day is gone. If they attacked at 6 in the morning, okay, they've been chasing these guys after this routed opposition down the valley of Ajalon, and the hailstones are hammering them great, but you know, they need to finish the job. They need to do their responsibility, you know, in defeating this army that's gathered against God's people. What happens? Well, Joshua comes to the realization that, well, it might be a valley, but there's still all kinds of hill country and it's difficult going, and my men are tired. Okay? They have had a forced march at night with no food for all practical purposes and no rest all through the night, and they attack at dawn. They've now been fighting for 6 hours. Okay? There's no lunch break in sight. Okay? And we're going to run out of time here pretty quick, because once the sun goes down, the enemy forces are just going to disperse and get away in the darkness. Okay? So Joshua asked really something incredible. He says, I need more daylight hours. Okay? This is what they call the long day of Joshua. It's a kind of a fascinating story, it really is. It goes through here, and this is how it begins. In the midst of a battle, halfway through, noontime, for all practical purposes. So he says, I need the sun and the moon to stand still. Now, what is, you'll find later on here as it goes down through here, is the sun is standing overhead. We can find that out. The moon, as we all know, at this its phase, apparently is hanging over the end of the valley down here. The sun goes down, the moon goes down, darkness descends, and the enemies of Israel can get away. So you kind of got the picture of the whole package. Verse 13 says, the sun stood still, and the moon stayed until the people had avenged themselves on their enemies. And is not this written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and hasted not to go down about a whole day. And there was no day like that before it or after it. We're thinking, okay, if you're kind of like me, or the first time through, or the first 20 times through, you're thinking, wow, no day like it when the sun stood still. That's not the real miraculous important part. Did you see that? What does he say? See right here. When the Lord hearkened to the voice of a man. That's the miraculous part. I just suggest that to you. At least don't leave that part out. It's obviously not the only thing with hailstones and all the other stuff that goes with it, and the moon and the sun. Now, how did that happen? Boy, I tell you, there are some entertaining notions about how this stuff happens. Whenever God does a miracle, you've always got people that profess to be Christian, or at least somewhat religious, that have to try to explain it away so that man's intellect is appeased. Okay? You want to know where evolution comes from? Same exact thing. Mankind refusing to accept that God can do the impossible just as easily as anything, and now you have to come up with some type of a natural explanation in the natural world. We've already run to this. You remember when Joshua brought them across the Jordan River when Jordan was at flood stage? And people said, well, maybe there was an earthquake, or maybe there was a rock slide, or maybe this and maybe that, and said, well, what do you do with the dry land thing? It's kind of like coming across the Red Sea when they came out of Egypt. They came across on dry land. You kind of, explaining the miraculous away. But what seems to be reasonable? Yeah, what have you heard? Anybody? Have you come through this, read through it before, read some commentary, and maybe it made sense, maybe it didn't? What have you heard? Anybody? Krista.
I just take it that because Joshua asked, the Lord listened and delivered.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it says, doesn't it? God's not particularly interested in having to appease natural science. After all, He created natural science. He's not controlled by it. It's just the other way around. What could have happened? There's kind of some interesting things here that go beyond just the extended day, which seems to be that it just stood still. Now, from natural science, you have some issues such as the Earth's rotation, gravity. I mean, why wasn't all mankind just flanged, thrown off when, if the rotation of the Earth stopped, why didn't mankind just go off or get squished against the other side? Yes, ma'am.
I don't think God stopped the earth. God only stopped the sun.
Yeah. But when you stop and think about it, you notice what it says here. That the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and hasted not to go down. Now, we use some expressions that are kind of interesting. We talk about stood still. We have terminology for that. In other words, we have such things that we realize that it's not the sun doing the moving. We on this globe move around the sun. The earth rotates on its axis. So when the sun stood still, scientifically is opposite from what the natural creation would have been. Now, what this means, well, we use terms like the sun rising, right? The sun doesn't rise. The earth rotates. It gives the appearance of rising the same way the sun gives the appearance of setting. The sun doesn't set. It's the earth's rotation makes it look to our view and our limited little humanity like the sun is going down. The sun's not going down. What it boils down to is the earth stood still. Same problem. You still have a miracle that is being spoken of here, this long day of Joshua, but the terminology you can find kind of fascinating. Ken?
You can take a choice. It's no harder for God to spin the universe around the earth to hold the sun in the same place than it is to stop the earth and hold people still. I mean,
Sure.
it's all trivial to him.
It's all, yeah.
It's only that you got to figure out how much power and energy it takes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's only when we try to bring God down to our box and make him jump through humanity's hoops of what we can do and how we think he did it. He didn't have to adopt any type of methodology. You know, he created it all to begin with.
He made it run backwards.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is kind of easy.
You know, he can make water run uphill or anything he chooses to do. What's, big deal. Okay. So to a large point, it becomes, as Krista mentioned in a different way, is how big is your God? Yeah. How big is your God? He spoke the worlds into existence out of nothing, and you think now he can't control a long day if he chooses to do so. But again, this one is more unique, I think, when you are unique or distinct. I believe because here you have a human being that speaks to God and makes a request that shatters the natural laws of the known universe. And God just says, yeah, that'll work. I can do that. Not a problem. And that's what you find. So verse 15 says, Joshua returned and all Israel with him to the camp to Gilgal. This is, again, they marched back to 25 miles. But the 5 kings fled and hid themselves in a cave at Makkedah. Now you got some additional information here that occurs chronologically during the time of this long day of Joshua battle. Okay. So you've got just a quick outline of that long day and its battle and the hailstones and the pursuit and the midnight march and all the other stuff and the return to Gilgal. And now you're going to get a bunch more information that fills in the detail. Think of it as Genesis chapter 2. Genesis 1 talks about creation week. Genesis 2 says, here's some additional information that I did during creation week, especially day 6, with this whole mankind, male-female thing. Okay? So additional, Book of Revelation does the same thing. Here's the chronology of what's going on. Let's stop right here for a minute. I'm going to give you chapters 12 and 13 that talk about everything that's moving and going on during that period. You can't do it. That is the way God, our minds can only comprehend the piecemeal aspect of building a chunk at a time and putting things in place. If we get 55 gallons of data in our 1 quart absorption capacity all at once, we're going to be overwhelmed. Most of us are overwhelmed with a gallon in a 1 quart capacity. Just think if God really dumped omniscience on us. Do you really think you can handle how God would explain stopping the universe for basically another whole day? You really think if God your head would just dissolve, your brain would just ooze out, and just the pus would just come out, and you'd be done. Yeah, I mean, yeah, God would fry your entire intellect with just a glimpse of how he actually thinks. So, verse 17, we've got the fleeing of the kings during this battle. They see what's going wrong. The hailstones come. The battle goes against them. They're taking off with their army. They're trying to get back into a secure territory. You know, they're hoping that darkness gets there. They're thwarted in that. So they wind up hiding in a cave along the way as they run down this valley, you know, trying to, and say, maybe they'll chase the army. We'll go hide here, let everything calm down, wait until it gets dark, and then sneak out and go home. You kind of get the idea. Verse 17 says, it was told Joshua, saying, we saw these guys run into a certain cave. You know, we've got it staked out over there. Not going to go well here. Really isn't. Not going to go well. So it says that Joshua said, roll great stones on the mouth of the cave. You know, what did they do that for? Well, they're chasing an army. And they're in the midst of this battle. And the 5 kings go off and zip over there and think they can hide, so to speak. Joshua says, I don't want to leave any bunch of men here to guard them because they might sneak out. We'll just block off the exit. And the easiest way to do it, just roll a bunch of big rocks there. I wouldn't doubt that they may even have left a few guys with spears or whatever to reinforce it. Okay. Verse 19 says, stay ye not, but pursue your enemies. He says, no, don't get sidetracked. Just incarcerate them effectively. You know, jail doors, chain them shut, lock it good, and leave them there. We'll get back to them later on, which is what they do. Okay? Smite the hindmost of the army that is fleeing. Do not allow them to enter into their cities, for the Lord your God hath delivered them in your hand. It came to pass, when Joshua and the children of Israel had made an end of slaying with a very great slaughter. Remember, people had to do it. God delivered, but men had the responsibility to do their part. Hasn't changed. The army against them was consumed. The rest which remained entered into fenced cities. The few that survived from this slaughter going down this valley, the few survivors trickled back into their cities, into the walled cities. And remember how these guys, Jerusalem and here and there and Gezer and all, this what they call the southern coalition of pagan kings, of the Canaanite kings. Everything that came about, right? Now, so everything is okay so far. Now back to the kings. Okay? You know, they finished going after them, finished the battle, finished the chase, you know, and etc. And now it's okay. We've done everything we can to, you know, completely defeat the enemies of God in the army. Now we've got those kings bottled up. Well, let's go deal with them. And let me see where, verse 21. The people returned to the camp to Joshua at Makkedah in peace. None moved his tongue against the children of Israel. I love that. You know, anybody gonna after this long day of Joshua and the military defeat of Israel's enemies, the annihilation of the opposing kings. The kings are captured and in the cave over there awaiting their demise. And it says that none badmouthed Israel at that point. Yeah, imagine that. Yeah. It would be, this is not the best time to, you know, say nasty things about the Jewish people. And, right. Then said Joshua, go open the cave, bring out those kings. They did so, brought them forth out of the cave, and it gives you a list. We'll talk about these kings in a moment, but it gives you a list of them: Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon. Came to pass when they brought out those kings to Joshua, that Joshua called for all of the men of Israel and said to the captains of the men of war, this would have been his chief of staff, his his generals, his field commanders, okay, the ranking men that were with him, come, put your feet on their necks, lop their heads off. That was what we were talking about there, okay? You just hold down their heads and lop their heads off, kill them, okay? Joshua said to them, do not fear, do not be dismayed, be strong and of good courage, for thus shall the Lord do to all your enemies against whom you fight. Afterward Joshua smote them, slew them, hung them on 5 trees, and they were there until the sun went down. Okay, probably the following day, but it could have been even the same day. It came to pass at the going down of the sun that they took them down, threw them in the cave, and collapsed the front of the cave. And at the time of the writing of Joshua, the bodies would have still been in there. Kind of got the idea? Everything that's going on here. Okay. Additional information as to what the details were during that long day of Joshua immediately following the battle. Okay. Now, verse 28 and following, let me just high grade it for you a little bit. Might help because it once again gives additional information. It says in verse 28, at that day Joshua took Makkedah. Okay. Makkedah was down over here someplace. Okay. If you weren't looking, down over here someplace. Okay. Out of Gibeon, not too far. Okay. Verse 29, they went from Makkedah to Libnah. These are the 5 kings that he killed, okay, at the end of the battle. And he is now going to the towns, the city-states that they controlled, okay, and he's wiping them out one after another. Okay. Verse 31, he passed from Libnah and went to Lachish. From there, it says in verse 33 that Horam, the king of Gezer, came up, and they had a little set-to there. Now, you're talking here about probably several weeks' time, perhaps even a couple of months, that this is going on. And in effect, Joshua is now cleaning up the remnants of this southern coalition. You see, Joshua's technique, apparently, was I'm going to go in here, I'm going to take Jericho. Then I'm going to take Ai. And then I'm going to drive a wedge. And then I'm going to come back somehow and probably take this one, and then this one, and then this one. But with being able to conquer the coalition gathered against him all at once and wiping out its kings, he understands the time is right to tidy up a little bit and just eliminate the opposition completely throughout all of this area of the southern hill country, the southern kingdom, the southern, the southern conquest of the promised land. Okay? So in verse 34, he goes from Lachish to Eglon, and from there, verse 36 says he goes from Eglon to Hebron. He took it, smote it with the edge of the sword, and so forth, blah, blah, blah. You can look at all the details. Verse 38, Joshua returned and all Israel with him to Debir and fought against it as well. So you have Joshua is just taking the opportunity to clean house. See, he's got it going. He's a military commander. He's riding the wave of victory. Okay? Probably the best modern parallel and illustration of this, okay? Well, I was going to say General Patton, but though he utilized it, Robert E. Lee adopted the same thing that Alexander the Great did. Okay? Germany used blitzkrieg. Hit them and then hit them again so hard and so fast they don't have a chance to regroup and rearm. Hit them again, hit them again, hit them again. Attack, 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 attack. Okay? That's what Joshua's doing right here. Okay? And maybe some of these guys noticed the success of Joshua down through history and said, that's what we need to do. Don't let them regroup. Don't let them form another coalition. Jack?
I was just going to say, this whole thing is just exactly like Korea was. The North Koreans chased the Americans clear down to Pusam and south of the peninsula. General MacArthur came in at Inchon and cut them in half and cut them off their supplies, and they had them trapped between the two. And
Yeah, because an army with no supplies soon becomes a bunch of civilians. You know, when you run out of ammunition and food, it changes. Yeah, very
then
similar.
they chased them clear back
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
the Yellow River and
Yeah.
China, and then the
Yeah.
Chinese got in.
Yeah, the German General Rommel, known as the tank commander, that captured most of North Africa for Hitler in World War II. It was basically the blitzkrieg, the lightning attack. That's what it means, blitzkrieg. The lightning attack. Hit them again, hit them again. Don't let them regroup. Don't let them go find their supply dump. Don't let them rearm. Don't let them refuel. Don't let them get more men. Don't let them do anything. Hit them, hit them, hit them. Well, I think that very possibly some of these people studied Joshua's tactics in taking the land of the Canaanites away from them because it was God's promised land for the nation of Israel. So he just went after them as fast and as hard as he could. See, he was apparently looking at going from town to town to town and developing a long-term campaign. Now, with the leadership of the 5 royal cities taken care of, he seizes the opportunity and says, pedal to the metal, let's go. So, Ken?
That's what I was gonna say. He doesn't, they're not gonna regroup. Their military, their leadership is all gone.
Yeah, it's gone.
They're just civilians sitting in the city waiting, so.
Yeah, leadership is gone, the troops are totally demoralized, they're sneaking back into their home cities under cover of darkness. You know, it's, taking off the black silk pajamas and putting on the farmer garb. You know, that's what we dealt with. You can see what's going on, and Joshua, seizes the opportunity of a good military commander and says they're demoralized, they're on the run, they have no leadership. If I keep hammering them, they'll never be able to regroup. And in probably not more than a few weeks, however you want to determine that, he has not only driven a wedge in here, but he has effectively captured the entire southern area of the Promised Land.
And nobody is going to rise up against them.
No, because just like verse 21 says, nobody's going to lift his tongue against the children of Israel.
But there's nobody there, because Joshua did what God said.
Yeah, Joshua does a good job. When he goes in and cleans house, the house is clean when he's done. So you get the whole package. So verse 40, as we end the chapter and finish up our time here this evening, Joshua smote all the country of the hills, of the south, of the vale, and of the springs, and all their kings. Now that doesn't mean much to us until you follow this between Dave and I, what we're trying to describe in this hill country, and the plains, and the sea coast, and the stream valleys. I get the idea. This is a biblical description of the different geographical countries, that there were these city-state kingdoms that were in opposition to Israel. That's where they resided. That's where they'd taken up their dwelling. Okay? The springs, the south, the vale, this is the southern conquest of the land. And at this point, the majority of the southern conquest of its major opposition to Israel has been completed. You still got the north to do, and you still have all kinds of resistance and pockets. You get to the book of Judges, you'll see that they had all kinds of problems. Yes, Dave?
It's probably generations later, the part of Judges we're talking about. Where
When you
people
get to
were
that
left
point, several generations.
able to rise up and present some
Yeah.
opposition, and then Israel had to take care of that as well.
Yeah, they had all kinds of problems. Those of you, you just remember when you start, especially in the book of Judges, you have the Promised Land, okay, under the control of different judges at different times, some of which overlapped. There wasn't a single judge that ruled the entire nation of Israel in that 280-year period. Okay. You had a judge here doing this, and at the same time, you may or may not have had a judge down here that was responding to this, and then the Philistines were doing this, you know, and then you had the Jebusites that were riding in from the desert, and there was a problem there with enslavement, and you had this constant mesh. That's why it is a doozy to try to figure out the chronology. It really is. Okay, it's so if you ever get it figured out, make a nice real flow chart of it. Send me one. And we'll call it even. Okay, but I warned you. So keep that in mind. So anyway, it says they had utterly destroyed all that breathed, as the Lord God of Israel commanded. When Joshua went into this country, he flat annihilated the enemy. He really did. Joshua smote them from Kadesh Barnea. That's clear off down here. Okay? I mean, he drove forces all the way down through to the very south end of the promised land. And then it says, even unto Gaza, that's clear out here on the seacoast. He's building a picture geographically of what he had accomplished with this southern campaign. All the country of Goshen, this is not Egypt, Goshen. This is another Goshen. We have no idea where it was. This is a different Goshen that was somewhere, I don't know, maybe over here, maybe up here, don't know. There's different theories, but don't confuse it with the Egyptian land of Goshen, where the Israelites wound up going, when they moved down there at the end of the, end of Genesis, I guess, wasn't it? Yeah, end of the book of Genesis. Anyway, hot and tired and all that stuff. Verse 42, all these kings, and then of course comes back around to Gibeon. So all this southern area, all in here. Joshua is very thorough in how he did this. And all these kings and their land did Joshua take at one time. Instead of an extended piecemeal at a time over years and years and years, Joshua did it probably in a few months at the most. Because, ready for it? Because the Gibeonites were deceptive. You ever wonder when we look at that black cloud and we say, I don't see any silver lining in this puppy. Okay? And you think, man, Israel got took. All they could come up with this whole treaty thing with Gibeon is say, you guys got to cut wood and carry water. I mean, in effect. And then Gibeon gets attacked by a coalition of people in opposition that Joshua was going to have to attack over a period of months, if not years, unless Gibeon deceived Israel and made a peace treaty that provided protection, and all of that becomes the silver lining for Israel, because now it says not only did God fight for Israel, but Joshua cleaned house all at once. He didn't have to do it over an extended campaign of umpteen years. Okay? I mean, we've had a few of those as a nation, sticking our face into various places and getting entangled, in military actions that never got resolved. Well, we're not the only ones. I mean, what did Russia spend? 14 years in Afghanistan? And all they got was thousands of graves to show for it. They didn't have any better luck than we had. This bad judgment, the whole long, extended, drug-out affair, God took the silver lining of the deception of the Gibeonites and turned it into a military victory for the nation that just abbreviated everything and wiped out the leadership, created chaos and bedlam throughout their enemies, and just made it easy peasy. Is that a technical term? made it much more doable for the nation of Israel. And so it says, Joshua returned, Israel with him, after this southern completion of this, and they came back to Gilgal. Okay? Because now you've got the north, okay, which is what you're going to wind up in the next chapter. So thoughts, comments? Kent?
You know, it says at the end of this extra long day, nobody said a word against Joshua. You wonder if, when they found out that they made this treaty with Gibeah, if there were people that were going against Joshua. But Joshua does the honorable thing. He keeps his word before God, and you can see what God does as a result.
And then God honors that commitment. Yeah, good point. Good point.
They
God.
would have trouble understanding, he said, I think we hope that we have an all-knowing God who knows all this is gonna happen when it happens. And we'll be kidding.
Yeah. He knows, we don't. Jack?
I'm just gonna say wars go pretty good until the politicians get in.
Yeah, yeah, it says that right there in verse 44, I think it is, isn't it? Footnote at the bottom, yeah. All right. Other thoughts?
It's interesting that the Gibeonites are smack in the middle of Canaan, where everyone is supposed to be wiped out. And yet, through this series of events, they're the only people that essentially God
Protected.
saves out of that.
Yeah, he actually wound up protecting them, because regardless of their deception, there was still a treaty that had been made. So yeah, it makes it kind of interesting, it really does. Gibeon was a thorn in the flesh for Israel, and then of course Saul reneged on the whole thing when he came to be king. You see, this is taking place, it's about an 8-9 year period from about 1406 to 1397 or so, something like that. Saul becomes king in 1090. Okay. So you've got the period of Joshua that's in here. Joshua dies when he's 110, goes into the promised land when he's 55. So you've got about a 60-year period. So Joshua would have died, rough math, 1035, 1040. That pretty well gives you a date for Judges after Joshua had died and the elders that outlived Joshua. Now you have kind of a chronology frame of reference when you step into the book of Judges and the disastrous stuff that went on, that cycle of sin. And like Dave pointed out very appropriately this morning, that cycle of sin that sections of Israel kept doing, denying God, walking away, getting punished, chastened, and so forth.
According to what I'm reading, it lasted for about 400 years.
Yeah.
The whole.
Not actually that long. I would debate that particular date because it doesn't fit the dates.
Yeah, I didn't check that
Yeah,
out.
it's okay.
It's a fairly significant amount of time.
Oh yeah,
They
it's
were dealing with
almost
remnants.
300.
They were dealing with remnants of people that were
The
left.
remnants, because they didn't, like Joshua did, he took them out and cleaned them out. But after Joshua's time, there were still remnants that they were supposed to be cleansing and getting rid of. And they found, for the matter of convenience, it was a lot easier just to say, well, they're not causing a lot of problem. They're over there, we're over here, we'll just let things slide, and pretty soon you've got intermarriage and pagan gods and all kinds of stuff. So, yeah, keep it in mind. So, anyway, got it? All right, closing prayer. Father, thank you for this time together. We praise you, Lord, for giving us the book of Joshua, your leader that was a man, didn't always get things exactly right, but he was a warrior. He was a man who fought for you and was committed to you. We pray, Lord, that we might learn not just the historical facts, but the principles, and see them applied in our own lives. Bless this group, Lord, as they go through this week. In Christ's name, amen.